Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Shaffer. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. In my work, I try to understand what kinds of psychological support family members and friends of people with cancer might need, and how to make that care more convenient and affordable and accessible. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about why communication is so important as a caregiver, and both how we communicate with our loved ones and our loved one with cancer, as well as how we talk about and to ourselves. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things in a short time frame, so I'm going to try to stay organized here. I'll start by talking about the talk and a few disclaimers that I think are important to lead with. Next up will be how you talk about yourself and a little bit about the caregiver label. And then we'll talk about how we can most effectively talk with our loved ones during cancer. And last, we'll talk about how we think about taking care of ourselves in the midst of taking care of others and the messages that we might send ourselves about that. So first up, disclaimers, just to give us a little bit of context around everything that I'm going to be talking about today. So first, and particularly as it relates to the section on effectively communicating with our loved ones, communication inherently requires more than one person, right? And unfortunately, we can only control ourselves. So I'm going to cover some tips and tricks to hopefully help you navigate some difficult conversations in a way that helps everyone feel respected and heard. But it ultimately does require that the person you're communicating with wants to play by the rules and show you respect too. And I know that that's not always going to be the case for everyone listening to this presentation. So relatedly, you're the real expert here. You're the expert in who you are, what your needs are, what your strengths and boundaries are. You're also an expert in your situation, meaning you know your relationships and what kind of power dynamics, norms, and culture govern those relationships, as well as what kind of cancer context you're living in. Not everything I say is going to work well or fit for everybody. It's my sincere hope and goal that something's going to resonate with everyone who listens today, though. And I do leave it up to you to decide whether and how skills and ideas that I talk about today will work in your life. And lastly, you might be listening to this during a pandemic on top of everything else that you might be going through, with lots and lots of stressors. So you might be in the middle of an extraordinary, stressful, and unusual time. When we're super stressed, it's hard to try new things. We're in fight or flight mode, meaning that we're going to stick with our old habits because they're quick and they're easy go-tos. And we're not at our most creative and open. So on one hand, this is a great time to be watching this training, since I hope most of what we discuss will help you deal more effectively with your own and your loved one's stress. But on the other hand, it's a really hard time to be trying new things when we're feeling overwhelmed. So just give yourself a little extra grace as we go. If we were all meeting in person, I might ask for folks in the audience to give me a show of hands of who in the room is a caregiver. What I'd expect to see is maybe a couple of confident hands go up, maybe a few more sort of hesitantly going up, and then some sort of shrugging their shoulders and looking a little bit sheepish, not knowing what to say. Now, the National Cancer Institute defines caregiving as simply as if you answer affirmatively to the following question: are you helping a loved one through cancer treatment? If that sounds like you, you're a caregiver. They follow up to define that giving care can be helping with daily needs, like taking someone to a doctor's visit, picking up medicine, picking up some extra chores around the house. It can also mean, though, a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on. If it's really as simple as that definition of caregiver, then why do so many shy away from the label? I'll often hear, oh, I'm not her caregiver, I'm her partner, or that's just what you do for your dad, meaning caregiving is an inferred part of being a good family member. And I think what that taps into is twofold. One, caring for a loved one is a deeply held value that many caregivers have, and that's really motivating and it's really rewarding. But I also think that the label caregiver brings up a lot of fear for people. that they don't want their relationship to change with their spouse or with their parent or sibling or any other relationship. Someone might also shy away from the label because, oh, I don't have any special medical skills or training or anything like that. And what they might really be thinking is, this is a really important role and I don't know what to do, so I can't be a caregiver. Listeners, my job is to study cancer caregiving, and I'm not sure I'll even feel prepared when it's my turn. Navigating cancer is scary and it's really hard. You might be needed to help with some tasks and not get a whole lot of instruction on it. And so most people in situations like yours would feel overwhelmed at different times. Last, sometimes people don't feel like they're a caregiver because they're not doing some of the more intensive medical or assistive living tasks that we might sort of more stereotypically think of as caregiving, like wound care or helping with bathing. They'll discount what they do and say, oh, anyone could argue with the insurance company, or I'm just driving her to appointments, or I'm not really doing anything. Meanwhile, they spent an hour and a half last night reassuring dad. These things add up. We all know that they can be really hard. But what's worse is I suspect the real issue here is that these kinds of support aren't valued. It's often happening in private, at home, and outside the acknowledgement of others and even ourselves. So each of these thoughts about the caregiver label are understandable. And I can't tell you whether thinking of yourself as a caregiver is going to be helpful or not for you personally. But I do think that they hide some important considerations. To the first about your changing relationships. Your loved one with, your relationship with your loved one with cancer is probably going to change if it hasn't already changed, whether you say you're a caregiver or not. It's a loss. And it's okay and often important to recognize and grieve these changes in your relationship. But it's also not an either or. You're always going to be a caregiver and something else to that person. A caregiver and husband, caregiver and best friend, caregiver and niece. And I wonder how it might feel different to you if you see yourself as having these different hats that you might wear more or less in different situations. To the second, there are some really good resources and supports out there for caregivers, and we'll talk about those at the end. But unfortunately, a lot of caregiver services go underutilized because people who are caregivers don't see themselves that way, and so they don't think that those services are for them. Acknowledging your caregiver role might help you find and get the resources you need to ultimately be an even better supporter. And secondly, as I said earlier in the disclaimers, please don't discount all of the knowledge you already have. You're already an expert on your loved one. You probably know better than anyone what helps them feel confident and comfortable and calm, and that's hugely important. And lastly, it's true that caregiving isn't valued as much as it should be. Family caregivers provide hundreds of billions of dollars worth of care that our formal healthcare systems depend on. You talk to oncologists and they'll tell you they worry more about their patients who don't have good support or any support than those who do. So everything you do matters. It's wrong that caregivers' time and effort isn't valued or compensated or acknowledged the way that it should be. But I especially worry when caregivers themselves don't value their contribution. If you don't value what you do, I worry you won't get the support you need to keep on and to keep yourself healthy. So I hope I've convinced you in this past section that helping a loved one cope with their feelings through the cancer experience is indeed caregiving, and it's a big important part of caregiving. So I want to just start with the basics. Think of someone close to you, partner, best friend, or roommate. When that person is stressed, how do you feel? A lot of times we end up feeling stressed too. And that can be for a lot of different reasons, right? Their stress might flow over into being sort of snappy or short with us. They maybe isolate themselves away and we miss them or feel uncomfortable. Maybe they outright tell us they're stressed. And because this is someone we care about, it's stressful to us when they're stressed because we want them to feel good and happy, right? And they aren't, so that's a problem. So it's in our best interest to help this person feel better, because that not only solves the issue of the person we love being stressed and that we don't like, but it also helps ourselves to ultimately feel better too. This is a process called Diatic Coping, and it's one way that we can cope with stress by accepting the help of people who are closest to us. And I hope this can be a helpful way of thinking about sort of the more emotional aspects of caregiving, that it can return a benefit back to you. And it also can help really bring us together with our loved one. And it helps build intimacy when we share a hurt or a fear, and then we feel understood and cared for by someone. So let's talk about how to help it go right by learning some common ways where it can go wrong. One common issue is missing signals from our loved one when they're stressed. Now, we communicate that we're stressed in a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes directly verbally, I'm really stressed out about this thing at work. Or indirectly verbally, maybe being kind of short with people or snappy, for example. Or non-verbally with our bodies, sort of isolating ourselves away, slumping down on the couch, crossing our arms up. Some of these signals are easier for us to understand than others, right? So we hope our loved ones give us the best chance to help by being direct, but this isn't always or even usually the case. So think a little bit. How do you communicate that you're stressed? How does your loved one communicate that they're stressed? Now, even when we do pick up on signals that our loved one is stressed, sometimes we don't respond with what they want or what they need. Sometimes that's because we're also too tired or too stressed to respond in the best way. So it's an important reminder of why we need to replenish ourselves as well. Another common way this shows up is someone who's stressed or worried just wants to share and be heard and understood. And the receiving party sort of jumps right into problem-solving mode. And often this is a real challenge for caregivers because you're so used to fixing and doing and jumping into action. But there's a lot of worries, and particularly in the cancer context, that unfortunately we can't always fix. And that feels really bad. But remember, your loved one is probably not asking you to fix them, but to listen, understand, maybe share your perspective on their fear, and to comfort them. And that we can do. So a good way to help avoid both of these problems is clear, assertive communication. Now, harking back to the disclaimers, this is where we're really operating under the assumption that everyone is playing by the rules and that they value their own and their loved ones' feelings. Again, that's not always going to be the case. But when that's more or less true, or to just give it a try responding to your loved one's clear or not so clear stress signals using the ABCs. I notice A, some sort of stress communication. Try for this to be an objective behavior. You're pretty quiet. I notice you're shorter with the kids than normal. Then I wonder B, your sort of best guess about the reason behind the stress communication. I wonder if you're feeling stressed, or I wonder if you're worried about the appointment tomorrow. And then lastly, follow with, would you like to see? C being your best guess about what might be helpful for that person. Would you like to talk about it? Would you like a hug? Would you like some alone time? And this is actually a slight variation on a really great communication recipe. You know, everyone sort of has that family recipe where you can switch it up a bit here and there, and it always seems to work. Same here. This is the ABC formula, and it's great for any kind of communication where you want to get a point across and make a request. A being an objective behavior, that's an issue. B being how that objective behavior makes you feel, and C, what they can do instead. And so this sort of formula can be great for dealing with other kinds of challenges in caregiving as well. For example, when you ask me last minute to cover you to take mom to her appointment, I feel disrespected. And I'd prefer that you tell me at least a day and ahead of time so I can rearrange my schedule. This respects both your needs and the other person's needs. But going back to coping together, for this version of the assertive communication formula that I have on the screen, it invites a clear communication response from your loved one, and it gives them an opportunity to accept or suggest something else. So maybe they clarify that they're feeling sort of a different kind of way, or they'd like a different kind of help. And again, this helps avoid both the issues of missed signals and mismatched responses. Another way we can go wrong with dyadic coping, though, is by how much we use it, both too much and too little. On one hand, it's important to remember, as I said before, that this is just one kind of coping of many. We can also take care of ourselves and as well as allow others in our trusted network to help us, which can often be really tough for people to ask for that help. On the other hand, oftentimes caregivers try to buffer their loved ones from knowing any of the personal worries or fears that they might be experiencing. And of course, there are times in relationships where that's going to be appropriate. But remember how we talked about before that coping together with a close loved one can help build trust and intimacy. And I challenge you to consider what's lost when you try to keep that constant brave face on. Your loved one might really value understanding what you're going through and having an opportunity to comfort you in the way that you comfort them. So we've talked about how being there to support someone else can take a lot of emotional resources. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't have an inexhaustible well of patience and strength to continually draw from. So if you're like me, we need to refill our resources from time to time. And I can almost hear the eye rolls of many of our more experienced caregivers who might be watching this. You probably can't count on your fingers and toes together how often you've been told to take care of yourself, but I hope you'll give me a chance here. So let's start by defining self-care, by defining what it is not. Pop culture makes self-care out to be taking some luxury vacation or going to the spa for a day. Those things are really nice. I wish we could do them all the time. But it makes self-care out to be something frivolous or inaccessible to the average person on the day-to-day. Far from being frivolous, self-care is actually a radical act that has roots in both social activism and spiritual practices. Activist Audre Lorde famous said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation." Taking care of our minds, bodies, and spirits is a radical act when you're doing something that's difficult and underappreciated, but important to your values. It's necessary to take care of yourself to avoid burning out, which would sideline you from this work that you care about. So rather than taking a dip in your private infinity pool, what this kind of radical self-care looks like is often much more mundane, like making sure you eat lunch, take your own medications and make time for your own medical appointments, that you take a break, and that you get help when you need it. Reframed this way, it's clear that self-care, meaning something that you do to keep yourself healthy and well, is something that all of us can do every day and is essential to our long-term capability to support our loved ones. So even when we think about self-care in this kind of different way, I still hear people say things like, oh, if I was just stronger, I wouldn't need help. Or if I was really good at this, or if I really cared enough, I wouldn't need a break. And that's really flawed thinking. So I think it's important for us to reframe self-care from a nice to have to a need to have. And I think this distinction hits home if we think about the differences between a sprint and a marathon. In a sprint, runners give it everything they have because they know that the distance is time-bound. They ignore all of their bodily signals that they're in pain, they've got to stop. It would be pretty silly for them to stop and rest or get water in the middle of a sprint because they don't need it. In fact, it would hurt their chances of achieving their goals. But think about a marathon. A marathon is also a timed race, and runners want to get to the end as quickly as possible for a marathon also. But the strategy is totally different. Imagine taking a sprinter's strategy into a marathon. No one ever of all time could run full out for over 23 miles with no stops. So pacing, stopping for water, these kinds of self-care considerations are necessary so that marathon runners can finish the race and achieve their best results. So when we think about it like that, looking at this picture of our two marathoners here, do you think that they're feeling guilty for slowing down to drink water? Do you think that either of these marathoners thinks, oh, if I was really a very good runner, I wouldn't need to stop for water? No, I imagine not. It's part of their strategy. They know it's necessary for them to do to achieve their long-term goals and to keep going. So you might have some appointments or some days that look more like sprints as a caregiver, but even sprinters don't go full out all day, day after day. They take breaks in their training. So don't think you can be a better sprinter than the best sprinters in the world. I challenge you to make a mental switch over to a longer term perspective if you're willing, meaning that you build in self-care as part of your caregiving strategy and see how that works for you. So if you're looking for more information about caregiving or some of these self-care strategies or reliable and comprehensive information about cancer and treatment, I always recommend the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute. Both have resources in multiple languages and all kinds of educational and support resources. And I also want to note that the SAGE group has wonderful resources of specific help to LGBT caregivers. And I want to shout out the Survivor Journeys organization, who's hosting this presentation, offers online caregiver support groups that are led by experienced caregivers. And so I'd encourage you to check out their website to learn more about that. Last, I want to thank you for listening today. I sincerely hope that you've gotten a good return on your investment of time watching this talk. I tweet about caregiving, among other things, from my Twitter account, Kelly M. Shaffer 1, if you're interested. Most importantly and sincerely, I want to say thank you for everything that you do to support your loved one. Be well.